Hi, I'm Ben.
And I'm Josh.
And this is the Bad at Magic podcast, a podcast about games, life, and other things. And welcome to episode 102.
So, Ben, what do you know about angel numbers?
Okay, that called to mind an idea of just like theory about the prophecies in the book of Revelation in the Bible. Is that what you're talking about?
Lower your expectations significantly.
All right, what are angel numbers?
Okay, so according to Alex Getz, who has been an astrologer and a tarot reader for nearly 20 years, angel numbers are, in numerology, they are numbers that keep recurring in your life randomly and sporadically. Like you'll notice, it's confirmation bias 100%. But you're walking around and you notice the same numbers cropping up over and over and over again. Like this guy is saying and hypothesizing that these are ways that the astral plane or the spiritual plane or your guardian angel or your fairy godmother is trying to communicate and impart meaning to you when these numbers keep popping up over and over and over again.
Okay, but I love that you chose this as our thing, as you know, our intro segment for episode 102, because for our main segment today, we're going to talk about prophecies of our fate.
Oh, well, there you go. Well, I'm going to break down 102 as the angel number, okay? So right. The number one quote is the ultimate vibration of new beginnings, change, and positive outlooks. So we're talking about number one is new. We're getting going. That kind of makes sense. It's number one. Number 0 represents infinity and nothingness. So a beginning with no end. So in perpetuity. 2 resonates with partnerships because, 2. 1 is the loneliest number, but 2, there's 2 people.
So you break it down by each digit?
Not only just each digit, but then he goes, and then number 10. Number 10 appears to doer. Like you have ideas and possibilities. Yeah, just like these combinations, right? So the number 102 is a sign to welcome fresh and reinvigorating energies into your life. It's basically welcome new experiences and opportunities. The most generic astrological nonsense you can get.
So this idea brings up a person from my past that just stands out conspicuously. When I was a full-time missionary, there was this lady whose husband was a radiologist and they had a lot of money. And so when I was a missionary, whenever we need a ride, we knew she was at home and she would give us a ride somewhere. And she didn't call it angel numbers, but she believed in this deeply. So whenever we were in the car with her, she would point out billboards and license plates and stuff around her that had numbers on it, and she would try to convince us that this was evidence that some fate was happening in her life.
So my counter argument to her hypothesis is that she just doesn't experience enough numbers to recognize the true randomness in her life. Because as an accountant, Ben, I can tell you, dealing with numbers all day, they're random. Like it's just a random distribution of stuff that shows up in your life.
Yeah, no doubt. But like you said, it's not only confirmation bias, it's also I forget the name of it we've talked about on the podcast, the effect of where when your brain is primed to look for something, you're more likely to see it. Ah,
yes, that the scientists suffer from that. They're like they already have a predetermined hypothesis and looking for support.
Right. It not only that, it probably attunes your senses. Like it makes you more likely to see it. So.
Now that's interesting though. Like if you're primed and you're like looking subconsciously for, this feels like a day of new beginnings. I'm going to look for things to confirm that this is a day of new beginnings. Are you like kind of manifesting?
Let's say the number 102.
I'm going to say, let's look around for number 102. Listeners, this is episode 102. If you were looking for confirmation, embrace new change. This is it. This is the universe calling you. But beside from that, like if you're legitimately looking for reasons to want to believe this stuff, and your confirmation bias is telling you, like, isn't that like a form of manifesting? Aren't you now like in the weirdest way possible taking the reins of your life and like, this is a day for change.
This is perfect, Josh. That by looking for your destiny, you're making it happen. That's exactly what we're going to talk about later on. You sent me something this past week. And I was like, this is a link from TikTok. And it's been well documented on this podcast that you have on a principled basis eliminated TikTok from your life. And once since we did that, maybe 3 months ago, you sent me a TikTok and I questioned you about it. And you said, oh, my wife sent me that and I just forwarded it to you. I haven't reinstalled TikTok. So this last time you sent me a link to TikTok, I said, are you back on TikTok? And you said, yeah, and I'm fine with it. So, sir, this is the first time we've had to talk. Defend yourself.
Defend myself. This is the thing is, I don't know what I did to make it sound like I made it such a decision that I now need to defend going back on it, right? Like at the time,
it kind of felt like that. Like, I'm your friend.
Did, yeah.
If you said to me, Ben, I've decided I'm going to stop smoking, I'd be like, all right, Josh, what do you want me to do? You're like, just help remind me, and if you see me do it, just support me, and I'd be like, okay, and I'll do that. But if you came to me and said, you know what, I don't want to do that anymore, stop reminding me about it, I'd be like, okay, so is that what you're doing here?
No, this is one of those things that comes back to bite me. Like my family has these things that they remember about me. Like I remember I was in high school and I listened to country music because that's what my parents listened to. And they said, no, I don't like rock or those other genres. This stuff's weird. I don't like it. But then I went to college and I came back and I had a whole, like you do in college, you get opened yourself up to new opportunities. Yeah, changed my preferences wildly. And then, I hated telemarketers for the longest time. And then when I got out of the military, moved back here, and I was setting up to start my own business, I needed something to tide me over for a couple of months, and I worked a telemarketing job, and just stuff like that. And so my family loves to razz me. That feels like the
Christopher Nolan, you either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
I pride myself on I was bad at that job because I processed more refunds than sales. So
yes,
good on
me. We already established that you were Robert Parr at the insurance company in The Incredibles.
yes, we did. In this one, this is so I missed it. Like we're talking about the sand that fills up the jar of your life. There's just these moments. It's like, man, I don't have enough time to watch a long form YouTube video, but I'm waiting for my lunch to microwave or whatever. I wish I could fill this 5 seconds with something interesting. And that combined with my wife showing me really funny TikToks, constantly throughout the day. I say constantly, twice a day, maybe that.
Okay.
And I went at it and I was like, you know what? There's no reason that I myself, a high-minded, disciplined person with willpower, shouldn't be able to partake of the good parts of this app without letting it, take over all of my free time like I did before.
This was happening in your mind over the past 3 months? Like, you know what? I'm a grown man. I should be able to have some self-control about this.
Yeah, that sounds like the junkie, totally justifying going back to his head, right?
But I want to take a tangent. You just said my wife's constantly showing me these, and then you minimize it and saying, oh, only twice a day. Can you think of any product or service that you would refer to someone else 2 times a day every day? Could you imagine if I texted you twice every day about Microsoft Windows?
Well,
Josh, this Microsoft Windows is really awesome. You should check it out.
It wasn't, but that's the thing. It's a difference between the platform and the content. It's not that she was showing me the platform itself. She was showing me content that existed on the platform.
I get it, but I'm just saying that's a really interesting place for a company to be in where users are, because they've provided a platform that produces such varied and appealing content. Then people are in effect referring fellow customers to their platform twice a day, every day.
Well, and that goes back to the business model that TikTok has, where every video is less than a minute, probably. And so I can only imagine the hundreds of videos that she watched that day, and only 2 of them broke her threshold of all the steps that she would have to take to show it to me outside of the platform itself. Since I've been back on it, she'll share.
They try to make that as easy as possible, though.
Well, now that I'm on the platform, she has shared with me, 10 a day. Anything that she finds humorous that she thinks I'll like, she shoots over to me. And it's funny because our feeds kind of line up, and so half the time I've already seen the ones that she's sending me, but it's still fun anyway. But the fact that I'm on the platform, I see a lot more than she sends me versus when I was off the platform. And she had to take the extra step of physically locating me in the house, stopping what she was doing to show it to me.
All right, I'm on board, Josh. So you're a grown man. You can waste your own time if you want to. Do you feel like going back on? Do you feel like there's something you lost that you've gotten back? Let's say specifically in this context with the connection with your wife.
Oh, well, I don't think we're not going to do relationship counseling or anything right now, but
No,
like
no, that's kind of what I'm asking, because that is the point I'm getting at. Let me say why I asked this. I have a friend who was having some problems in his marriage that stemmed from an incident he had with contact he made with someone on Facebook. And so as part of the restitution in their relationship, she made him uninstall Facebook and swear never to get back on it.
Wow.
And because he was no longer on the platform, I lost kind of my only easy source of connection with him, and it seriously deteriorated our friendship.
Are you saying that you would rather be friends with him than him be with his wife in a loving relationship?
No,
that's very selfish.
They've since gotten divorced, and it had nothing to do with me. But,
but he's back on Facebook.
Now he's back on Facebook, and we're friends again. I wasn't going to say that part, but you forced my hand.
That's the end state of this whole thing. That's really funny.
But that gets back to my question about your wife. Like, there was this thing she was participating in that you weren't, and so it was a little bit of divide. Maybe not a deliberate one, just kind of an incidental one. I feel this with my wife. There's a lot of TV shows and books that she likes to read and watch that I'm not interested in, and I'm conscious of the fact that me not also partaking in them is a lost opportunity of connection.
Well, I would encourage you to find overlapping sections. That's what me and my wife do. I have shows that I want to watch.
On that.
Okay, yeah. Everybody has their shows. Like I have my shows, she has her shows, but we try to find shows that we like our interests overlap, and then we watch those shows together.
Good advice. What about TikTok?
So what about TikTok? No, I have not reflected on my using TikTok in the lens of my marital status. I honestly, like, the closest that topic came to my mind was some jealousy, where if we'd be like, lying in bed that 20 minutes while you're looking at your phone, just doom scrolling before you go to sleep, and she's over there like giggling at TikToks, and I'm over here just like trying to find a good long form YouTube video, and just like, oh, I wish this content was delivered to me faster in a shorter. I wish this algorithm was able to refine itself more quickly. Why don't you
just watch YouTube Shorts, which is just TikTok cloned?
Oh, because copies are never as good as the original. You know that.
Oh, I'm trying to think of a case where that's not true. Like the Quaker brand generic cereal being better than the original. No, it's never as good.
No, not only that, but it's got years up on the competition. Like, this is honestly, to me, seeing YouTube Shorts pop up, seeing Instagram Reels trying to do the same thing, like all of these Facebook Watch, all of these competitors trying to recreate what is exactly the TikTok experience, just screams at me that TikTok is the app that you want to be and the app that you want to be on.
I know that this isn't always true, even though you presented it as a rule. So listeners, I can't think of any off the top of my head right now, but if you can, I want to hear them. What are some things you can think of where someone copied something else and it was better than the original?
I'm going to put an asterisk on this. If this is something that like a guy made in his basement and then the IP was purchased by Google and then they recreated it better, that doesn't count. That's not fair.
All right.
So yes, I am back on TikTok. I appreciate, like, I'm not on it nearly as much as I was in the past. I don't.
I'll stop giving you a hard time about it. Okay, go ahead and send me TikToks.
This is honestly the most interesting thing about this TikTok was that when I reinstalled it and was watching it for a day or two, I would come across something I wanted to share with my wife, but I hesitated. I didn't want to send her anything in the app because that would tell her that I was back on the app after I had said on the podcast that I was uninstalling TikTok. The same with you. I was watching these videos on there for like a week and like multiple times.
I can't send this to Ben because I don't want him to know I've reinstalled the app.
I can't send this to Ben because he'll make a whole thing about it on the podcast. We'll do a whole segment about how Josh went back on his word. And yeah, here we are. I successfully predicted the future. And at one point, Josh, that's when I sent you that TikTok and you sent back, "Are you still on TikTok?" I immediately blasted you with like 3 paragraphs of, I knew this was going to happen.
You prepared them.
Get off my back. Like, I know that I'm going to have to fight this battle.
I can get off your back.
It. No, I know. Right. I'm not. You're not on my back. I know. I knew that I was going to have to fight this fight.
I have a principle that I heard from a conservative radio talk show host that's a pariah, but something he said once really resonated with me. When I was young, I used to think that if you had principles, you would always do the same behavior no matter what and never change. We kind of vilified the idea of like politicians, quote unquote, flip-flopping. And he said, I don't mind if people change their mind on things, it means that they listen. And as long as you can explain to me why you change your mind on something, then that shows that you're flexible and a critical thinker.
Aw, what a kind way to make me not feel so bad about reinstalling TikTok, man. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I'm coming at it now more prepared of what this app is and what it could do to me. And so like I'm limiting its use to certain times of the day. I'm not on it for hours and hours at a time. Like I don't feel the same deterioration of my attention span that I did before.
Sure. And humans are prone to this kind of thing. I mean, enter alcoholism. You know, there's responsible drinking, and then there's drinking to excess where it takes over and ruins your life.
Yeah.
And you could just stay at one extreme of the spectrum and say that there's only two places to be, but for most behaviors, there aren't only two places to be.
Well, and it's like you said, it's a spectrum. It's just some people are more susceptible to, like, the incline of that spectrum changes depending on the type of person. There are people that can find themselves happily on one part of the spectrum, and other people that can't stay anywhere except at the extreme end for whatever reason.
Yeah, I remember in the early 2000s when the politicians' latest boogeyman was to try to blame all of the ills of society on video games. And they would really glam on to whenever there would be like some gamer in some Asian gaming cafe that would do a 37-hour gaming marathon and die at the keyboard.
There's very few of those happened.
Imagine enough like, that it kept stoking the flames.
Yeah, but even if it only happened once or twice, that's way too many times. Like, thanks.
Sure, that's two more times than razor blades and Halloween candy. But yeah,
I'd only have 2 nickels, but still, it's weird that it happened twice. But imagine, like,
I wonder how many times it did.
Exactly, it's like it got to be an urban legend, right? Because all I can think about is the business owner, the guy running the internet cafe, allowing some disgusting, greasy guy to sit in this room for 37 hours and be like, dude, you need to leave and shower before you can come back in here.
Well, this week, a couple of new cartoons went out, and since we're the fathers of children, we tend to see those kinds of things, and you saw one that I didn't, and then we both saw the same one. So let's talk about those for a minute.
Okay, so last weekend, I went and took my kids to Ruby Gillman Teenage Kraken.
Okay, first of all, there are... about half the time you take your kids to the movies, they're ones that just I wouldn't even take my kids if they were the same age as your kids. So why did you go see this one?
Because, I don't know, we've been on a movie kick this year. Like, we got the rewards points and we got the popcorn thing. Like, I mean, I don't even know what to tell you there.
You've chosen that as one of your regular family togetherness outings.
Yeah, we've been to 4 or 5 movies this summer. And
okay, I bet that makes it so that movies that you used to not go to, you would now.
Yeah, just having this routine settle in. And like I said, going to the movies is usually like $150 for a family. But yeah. they've suckered us in. We've bought the loyalty cups, so instead of $8 for a soda, it's $1. And then we've got the popcorn reward, so basically we just paid for all of our popcorn in advance. So it seems like when I go to the movies, I'm only spending $10 at the concession stand where I used to spend $60, and I feel that little dopamine hit of like, oh, look at me, this savvy consumer saving all this money, when I could have saved all the money by staying home, but that's not the point.
What did you go see?
So, yeah, we saw Ruby Gillman, Teenage Kraken, and it's a kid's movie. But even for a kid's movie, like, it's a dumpster fire. Like, it's just, it's so bad. Like, there's kids' movies done well where you as an adult can watch and, like, it's not, riveting edge of your seat drama, but at least it's somewhat entertaining. This one was not that way. Like, it was just, all of the previews, like, destroyed it for me. Because I don't know if you've seen the previews for this movie, but every preview that has come out, it shows like the main bad guy, the villain at the end of the movie is going to be the mermaid, and like that's almost like the selling point of the movie is like, oh, the mermaids are the bad guys. It's so crazy.
Okay, so this is a whole subgenre I want to say where like what they depict in the trailer doesn't match what you get when you go to the theater, and I don't know why that happens. Where the marketing guys are so out of touch that they're marketing a different movie than the one they're showing you. One of the most notorious I remember was a movie that came back out in the early 2000s called Millennium Man, where Robin Williams played a human android that was like a servant in a house, and the trailer portrayed it as like a Robin Williams comedy piece, and it actually turned out to be a deeply moving human drama. And so people went into the movies expecting Mrs. Doubtfire and got, I can't think of a good example, but a human drama instead.
Yeah, they got like almost ancient Greek philosophy on what it means to be man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember watching that movie for the same reason. Like, oh, Robin Williams is funny. I want to see Robin Williams be funny. And then I walked away from it questioning my existence as a sentient life form.
But if you don't go into that movie with all the expectations that it's going to be a Robin Williams comedy, it's actually a really good movie. And so take away your expectations from the trailers. Was Ruby Gillman Teenage Kraken any good?
So the trailers, no, it was bad. It was bad, start to finish. It screams at me that it's a bad adaptation from a YA novel, from like a not even a YA, but like a little kid novel. And like I said, the previews kept showing
like Captain
mermaids.
Underpants.
Like, oh gosh, yes, Captain Underpants was also terrible. But at least Captain Underpants was funny. Like, if you put your expectations at zero, like, you still laughed at it. This one, like, I can't get over the mermaid thing because that was the selling point of the trailer. This subversion of expectations that mermaids are the bad guys. But Ben, Acts 1 and 2, the mermaid is trying to be the friend of the main protagonist. And, like, it's setting up as this twist betrayal and, like, oh, this crazy twist villain for Act 3.
But they'd already spoiled it in the trailers. So
but everybody in the theater knew exactly what was going to happen. And so, yeah, it just, like, there was no sense of tension or drama or anything. I will say...
an internal fight about that.
I will say one thing. Like, if you've seen any of the previews for this movie, like, the protagonist, Ruby Gillman, is clearly, like, an undersea creature. Like, she's green. She moves, her arms and legs move like tentacles, not like arms and legs, and she's got big fins where her ears should be. And I wanted to know, how are they going to address this? Do the other characters just know that she's some kind of sea creature, or that she's got some kind of, like, I wanted to know, how are you explaining this away? And that, they didn't just hand wave it. They actually did it in a way that I appreciated and I thought was really funny.
What? Really? Wait, was she on land?
Yeah, they were on land. It's this family of krakens that live on land amongst the humans and are portraying and are selling themselves as, oh yeah, we're just normal human people like you people. But they're blue with fins for ears and tentacles.
Okay.
And they got away with it by saying they're Canadian. Like, there was a tour bus that drove past her one day, and they stopped, like, why is that girl
Canadians.
blue? And she goes, oh, we're Canadian. And she turned around, there was a Canadian flag in her backpack, and they played, like, Oh Canada for, like, half a bar. Da, 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 da. And then everybody on the bus goes, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Canadian. Yeah.
And then that was it. That's all you needed for the rest of the movie.
All right, that's a good joke. It was a 2-hour setup for that joke.
Yeah, basically. And that was the only joke that I appreciated the whole time.
Okay, I've developed, I don't know what I call it, my, like, sixth sense about whether I think a movie's going to be good or not, and I won't go see one that falls below my threshold of, like, no, that looks like I'm not going to have a good time. So I'd seen a trailer for Ruby Gillman Teenage Kraken, and I knew I was skipping that one. But I saw a trailer this week for a new Netflix animation called Nimona. Have you seen this yet?
So we actually, when we got home from Ruby Gillman, I knew Nimona existed, and I was like, I should watch that with my kids. And I looked it up on my phone, and it had a Rotten Tomatoes of 94%. And I'm like, this is going to be the perfect palate cleanser for that pile of garbage that I just watched.
Okay. All right, yeah. So I saw the trailer for it, and it looked interesting. The animation was beautiful, and it looked like a unique plot I hadn't seen, so I checked it out. So, spoilers for Nimona. First of all, I really enjoyed it. It was fantastic.
It was. I enjoyed the slow evolution of, like, you have this funny character, but then, like, it's this slow boil of, like, a very impactful character by the end of the movie.
Yeah.
They did a good job, like, ramping that up without you noticing.
Yeah, because she comes out playing an archetype that you think you know, and that's the plucky, quirky sidekick that's only there to, like, antagonize the protagonist. They're an antagonist. You don't think of them. They're not going to change. They're there to just be themselves and help our protagonist go through his transformation.
Right.
And yet, by the end of the movie, she also turns out to be a protagonist, and she has her own transformation. In fact, maybe she's the only one that changes.
Ooh, good point. She might be the only... No, actually, I'll take that back. Because the main quote-unquote protagonist, he, like, his transformation, there was one, but it was subtle, and it was like just taking everything at face value, and he had an almost kind of systemic racism against like her kind in that movie. And then like it was just so subtle, like the different ways that she pointed out, like, hey, you're being insensitive right now. Like he asked her at one point, she's a shapeshifter. This is spoilers, everybody. And he's like, does it hurt when you shapeshift? And like, then she responded with like, oh, do you want to ask any more small-minded questions? Like just reminding him like, hey, this isn't stuff you're supposed to be asking people like me. And like, but by the end of it, yeah, he was a much more open-minded and accepting person than he was before. So I think it's two protagonists that would have both been antagonists had they not made a relationship with each other. It was the relationship was the real antagonist that transformed the both of them.
Yeah. I like it. Cool. Well, I don't have a lot more to say about it other than I enjoyed it. And I recommend it.
The only other thing I want to say about it is their shtick is that it's like the medieval times, but like 1,000 years in the future. So it's like a futuristic knights and dragons kind of thing, which
yes,
is a stretch, but I appreciated the aesthetic anyway.
Yeah, it was just an artistic choice, I think.
Yeah, the knight
kind of
with the robot
for a
hand.
Unique visual style. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. The flying horses. Yeah, it was cool.
To close another loop that we've talked about in the past on the podcast, the Magic the Gathering 1 of 1, the One Ring from the Lord of the Rings has been found.
Wow. Everybody relax. Post Malone, go ahead and send all your sweatshop workers home. It's already out there. We don't have to look for it anymore. And
it wasn't just hype. The company that had promised a bounty for it bought it, and they have it in their possession for a price of $2 million.
Whew. You know what? There was a wonderful YouTube video that Pleasant Kenobi put out talking about the logistics of that. Like if you had a $2 million piece of cardboard in your hand and this store wants to buy it from you, they're in Spain. How do you get it there? Do you just like put it in your carry-on so TSA can mess with it?
Do you get a guy in a suit with a briefcase chained to his wrist?
But then that just screams you have something valuable. Do you like charter a private jet and just negotiate that as part of the transport costs for this other company?
Well, let's add a step here because I want to talk about this part of it. Whoever it was that found it decided to get it graded. So there's 2 or 3 popular companies that will grade collectibles of all sorts, but are notorious for cards like Beckett and I can't remember a couple others. And basically, if you send them a card, they have an objective set of standards they apply to examining the condition of the card, and then they'll encase it in protective and then assign a grade to it and give it back to you, and then it retains that evaluation of its condition.
Yes, and so how did he get it to them? I'm sure he just stuck it in an envelope and put it through the normal postage, right? But you can't because postage only insures up to like $250,000.
Yeah, I bet we could find out. Like, I bet if I go to one of those grading sites, they probably have very explicit, specific instructions for how to get it to them.
I personally, if it was me, I would have road tripped it to one of the Beckett places. Like, I wouldn't have told anybody. I just would have drove there.
Do you remember, you talked about this on an old episode of Bad at Magic, so listeners, if you haven't heard, here's a flash to the past. So early on in the genesis of the Bad at Magic podcast, I think the weekend Josh and I recorded the first episode, we had a common friend who's an officer in the Army. Josh met him there, but I've been friends with him for a while, who's also a Magic player, and his hotel room had been broken into, and they'd gone through his wallet and taken his cash or something like that, and they left his bag full of Magic cards sitting on the nightstand, which was probably worth in excess of $10,000.
Yes, like they took his cash, which was like $100, his credit cards, which he shut off immediately. But because they didn't know what they were looking for and realized the value of the thing sitting next to him, like they missed out on the real prize.
And what I'm getting at is if you're mailing a card to a card evaluation company, it's just going to get lost in the obscurity of it. No one thinks you're sending a $2 million Magic card. Yeah,
but you can't mail it because just in case because stuff happens in the mail, and if it gets destroyed, then you're just out that money.
You're right. It exceeds insurance amounts, so you'd have to take extraordinary measures.
And at the same time, you don't want to just put it in your carry-on or your checked luggage if you're going to get on an airplane, because TSA does open up people's bags and mess with stuff. And then what happens when you get the 17-year-old TSA, this is his first week there, and he opens a bag to do a random spot check and finds the 1 of 1 ring and knows what it is? That's too tempting. It's too easy for that guy to slip it in his pocket, put it in his 2 weeks, and you'll never find him again.
I don't. That's not possible. What you just said. I can't even imagine how that can happen. Like, it's not possible. Anyway, so they found it. But here's the thing. Here's what I wanted to bring out in this.
Okay.
In that situation, like if you found a pack of unopened beta magic cards and you opened a Black Lotus, you would want to do this thing where you send it off to an objective third party who specializes in grading these kinds of collectibles and would conduct an evaluation of it and send it to you, and you can use that in determining the value of it. However, I want to contend that I think grading of the one ring, one of one magic card is irrelevant.
It is irrelevant. I completely agree. I think it got a score of 9.8, which is not perfect. It's not perfect mint condition. There's 0.2 points taken off it for whatever reason. But I agree with you because there's only one of them. Even if it was a 6, it's still just the one of one ring.
There's an inherent aspect of grading something, and that is that maybe you don't realize you're doing it, but you're comparing it against others of the same kind.
Right.
If I had a 1949 Wagnus Honer rookie card and I sent it off to Beckett to get graded, it would be because I want to show that it's in better condition than other ones out there, and therefore worth more. But when you have something that's one of one, that kind of grading is irrelevant, even nonsensical.
I honestly
think the only one.
Well, I agree, but I think the grading was much less about the grade that the card got and more of a third party confirming the validity of the one of one ring. Like Beckett
and I'll
has
agree
put
with that.
Yeah, Beckett has signed on the line saying, yes, we as an objective
I don't know what company it was, but yes, some objective third party says this is not a counterfeit.
Yes, that would be what I think. And honestly, that might be where that 0.2 came from when they damaged it ever so slightly conducting whatever tests that they did to make sure it was the one of one ring.
Yeah, regardless, it didn't change the value at all. You could use that thing to make the motorcycle sound in your bike spokes, and it's still the only one in existence.
Don't do that, but you could have. Now, what I'm most interested in about this whole thing, because we've been talking about this forever, not necessarily from the card game perspective, but from the business perspective. The existence of this card in specific, like premium packs, was going to drive sales of this product through the roof. Now that it has been found, and it did, but now that it has been found, like I remember texting you because the article or the tweet came out in 8 o'clock in the morning, my time, showing that the one of one ring had been found. And at that time, collector's booster boxes were selling for $500 a box. By noon, 4 hours later, the price of those booster boxes had dropped to $350. Because,
but if I recall, that's still above MSRP. So, yeah, but nah. I want to shift gears a bit, Josh. I want to tell you about something that happened that you know about, but I also want to tell our listeners. So this is a significant and emotional event for me because of where I'm at over here. So my job is I'm the executive officer to the commander of the wing at this base, which it means a lot of things, but it also means I was right at the heart of the transfer of power we call a military change of command. So in most units in the Air Force, I don't know what it's like in the Army, Navy, or Marines, commanders, because so much is demanded of them, they usually have a fixed tour of a very specific length. In garrison, in stateside locations, it tends to be 2 years. And then overseas, it tends to be 1, just because of the operational tempo and those kinds of things. They bring in a commander, they do their job for 1 or 2 years, and then they take them out. And also because of the need to rotate them on a predictable schedule, it tends to be during the summer and those kinds of things. So it happens very regularly, very predictably.
For the better or worse. Like, they don't ever have to live with the ramifications of their decisions, but at the same time, they're always having a fresh set of eyes on how things are working. Like, man, I could go on a rant about that for
No, those
an hour.
were both great things. And I think you kind of picked the ones on the top of the pile. Like, yeah, you don't have the benefit of having someone around for a long period of time who has to, like you said, deal with the ramifications of their decisions and have the continuity and the understanding of the situation and all the things that would come from being around for a long period of time. But you do have fresh set of eyes, an energized person who isn't beat down by the demands of the job and all those kinds of things.
Yeah. Again, we don't have to go into that.
Yeah. So I want to talk about the tradition surrounding these things. So every year or two, when you have this transfer of power happen, it isn't just like someone signs a piece of paper, they high five and swap seats. We tend to make a production out of it. Some of it is pomp and circumstance, but some of it is very deliberately done to ensure the success of the continuation of the mission.
Well, and the tradition goes back to the idea that when you're changing the commander, everybody under that commander's command, dang, I ran out of words. Everybody under them needs to recognize that the power has shifted. That guy was the boss, but now this person is the boss. Even if you're the lowest level dude and you don't interact with them ever, you need to know who's actually in charge.
There's no hashtag not my president here.
Yeah, exactly.
It's that guy was in charge, now this guy's in charge, and we carry on as if it was the same person.
Right. And so they do a ceremony. Like, even if it's a squadron change of command, the squadron shows up. If it's a group change of command, all the squadrons in the group show up. So whoever the commander is, everybody under their command shows up to go see it.
Okay. So in the military, we have lots and lots of traditions that have an origin some point in the past, and they're carried forward. I want to talk first about some of the reasons that we do that. So I think it's important that we have traditions like this because it shows the perpetuation of the ideals that are at the heart of doing this right. While we are an instrument of violence, we also are constrained by the rule of law, and we represent the virtues of the constitutional democracy representatives that, we're promoting values of freedom and justice and equity. We're not just like here to pillage and plunder. Like, would you rather have an American, would you rather have an American army unit marching into town or the Mongols?
I don't know. If your commander is General Patton, it might not be very much different.
I don't think there was any raping and pillaging, but yes, you see my point. So this military change of command is one of many, many military traditions we have. At the beginning of this ceremony we had last time, they begin by reading a little blurb where they talk about how George Washington passed a flag underneath a tree from one commander to another, representing this peaceful transfer of power. And the flag that he passed was representative of, like you said, the authority to direct troops in battle, and now they must change their loyalty from one person to another and carry on. So in this one, it was significant because our new commander, Julie Gollin, is the first woman ever to command this unit after, dozen years or so or something like that. And so we have this ceremony where the senior commander that's over all of the units of similar makeup comes to our base, and they're the person that officiates this ceremony where we take this guidon that has a flag on it that represents our unit, and we take it from the person currently in command, and then we hand it to the person that's assuming command, and they salute the commander and say, "Sir, I relinquish command. Sir, I assume command." There's a lot of pomp and circumstance surrounding all of that, but at its heart, that's what it is. It's to represent this tradition that supposedly dates back to George Washington of peacefully transferring this authority to guide troops into battle from one senior commander to another. Good with all that?
Yeah, I love how these stuff like that, the protocol just stacks up over the years, and it's always additive, it's cumulative, not subtractive. Like you said, it started with George Washington, like, hey, everybody, this is the new guy, like hand him a flag, follow this one. And now it's like speeches and presentations and flowers are given to spouses and just so much crap that goes along with it, and just the timing of it. And it's like a 2-hour ceremony, isn't it?
Okay, so all of that you just said is probably true stateside, but the deployed environment strips a lot of that away out of necessity. The families are watching on Facebook Live. There's no flowers.
This is why like deployed units are like the distilled version of this is what the military is supposed to be.
Yes, you're getting at exactly what I wanted to talk about. That's why I love deployment so much. It's the distilled essence of the good parts of the military. So everyone's here. The 3-star comes down. The U.S. ambassador's here. There's fellow commanders from our sister services across the country. Some Army generals from Camp Arifjan. The local honorary commander, Mr. Saleh al-Ali, who was the translator to General Schwarzkopf when he liberated Kuwait back in the 90s. our fellow coalition partners, all these people, and then all of the people currently under the commander's command come into a room and we kick off this ceremony. There's a few other parts of it. We give a medal to the outgoing commander. There's speeches made by the outgoing commander and the incoming commander and the overarching supervisory commander. And all in all, it was over in about 30 minutes.
Wow. That's good and short for a formal ceremony.
Because it was broadcast on Facebook Live for the families, it's archived out on the internet on a public website. So I'm going to put a link in the show notes if anyone's curious to watch a good example of a traditional military change of command. This is a good one. I'll put a link in the show notes. You can watch it if you'd like.
If you look carefully, you'll see Ben freaking out about all of the details in the background because that's his job.
I was out of frame, I think, for the whole thing. So I was just sitting back enjoying it. And there's a lot of good stuff happening here. These traditions give an opportunity for people that are normally too busy or too separate to all get together and to come into contact with each other. So all those people I rattled off, all the dignitaries and high-ranking people and coalition partners, they don't normally all get together in a room and look at each other and talk about the strength of the partnership and shake hands and develop those relationships. So that's one positive thing that comes out of all of this. I think these are good for everyone. In the best aspects of these carrying out, you've got your peers, your subordinates, your higher headquarters, your coalition partners, your host nation, everyone coming together and recognizing the legitimacy of the authorities and diplomatic agreements that led to this being here. That's all good stuff. It also passes on the traditions and values that transcend any particular moment in time. If you come to our base on any given day, there's a thing we're worried about, whatever it is. But at those kinds of ceremonies, you don't talk about that. You talk about why we're here, what it is that we all agree on, what our commitment to the mission is. We promote the values of our leaders being servants and trying to help promote the wellness of all involved.
I love how jazzed and positive you are about this whole experience because this is such a microcosm of our dynamic on this podcast.
I know, Ben, and I was expecting you to do this, so go for it.
Because you know this story and you know this about me, but this is another way that I was a hypocrite because when I was in my early 20s, I knew alcoholism ran in my family, and so I was adamant, like I'm not going to slide down that slope. I'm just going to stay away and not partake of the devil's nectar. And then I was put in charge of a stateside change of command ceremony as the action officer, coordinating and scheduling and making sure everything went according to plan. Basically kind of like what you did for this change of command. And it drove me to drink, Ben. Like that was the first time I left my the building that I was working at, and I looked at my then girlfriend, now wife, and said, I want to get drunk. Yeah. And I did. Because it was just such a nightmare and such a prima donna moment for these people, and I spent weeks setting everything up, and then we go to the dress rehearsal, and then these two people want to throw monkey wrenches at me the whole time. Like, this is happening tomorrow, and you want to change all this crap, but we have to because you're the boss.
Okay, so let's talk about it from a cynical point of view, because I definitely gave the rose-colored glasses version of it. From a cynical point of view, it's just a meaningless waste of time. Like, it doesn't mean anything. All that really means is that some 3-star signed a piece of paper that said this new guy is the commander, and now he has what's called G-series orders, which means he has legal authority to order these troops into battle, potentially execute non-judicial punishment, and even imprison them if necessary. That's the only meaningful thing that happens in all of that.
Technically, in a handful of circumstances, he could also pull out his pistol and shoot somebody. Yeah, like one of his subordinates legally, yeah.
Yeah. If you're egotistical, it's aggrandizing. You know, you're giving this opportunity, and there's TV cameras and photographers and all important people in the room, and it's just a big ego party.
Yep.
If you're selfish, it's an opportunity to set you apart from your progenitors and your successors and show why you were a better commander than anyone that came before you, and how things are going to fail after you leave. And yeah, so there's a lot of opportunity for cynicism, egotism, and selfishness here.
Yeah.
That none of that was on display through the entire process of what I just went through. None.
Now you say that, but at the same time, like you even said the rose-colored glasses, and you're just universe, like everything is rosy kind of guy anyway. So it could have been on display, but just you are prone to overlook things like that and focus on the positive aspects of this change of command. All of the wonderful military-ness and like the chest thumping like awesomeness that this whole thing is supposed to represent. That is in you. And it is absolutely in me to gloss over all of that nonsense and focus on these people being on just a ridiculous power trip the entire time. So there could be some bias in both of our perspectives here.
Yes. I want to give an example, a political example that's non-military, where we also do this in our society, and that is a presidential election. So in a presidential election, we elect a new president, and sometimes, frequently, we transfer power from one political party to another political party. And it's supposed to be a characteristic or even a desirable aspect of our form of government that then peacefully the outgoing political party transfers power over to the incoming political party and wishes them well. And the big ceremony version of that is what do we call it? The inauguration.
Yeah.
Yes.
Are you really pulling the pin on this grenade and just going to toss it into the middle of the podcast like this?
I have something specific I'm going for here, but if you want to take it on a tangent, that's fine. So we have the inauguration that happens, and then the outgoing guy wishes the incoming guy well and departs. If you look at our in recent history, with one major exception, we have our past presidents that all belong to this kind of fraternity where you see them getting together and like chummy, hamming it up, shaking hands, hanging out, golfing together kind of thing, because they all have that kinship that comes from having gone through the crucible of being president. And you hear, even though there's the big pomp and circumstance of the inauguration itself, in the background the things that are going on to help set up the success of the next administration, because you want the country to be well and do well. So you hear about how like President Bush left a handwritten note for President Obama, and they, made sure the office was clean and peaceful transfer of power from one administration to another. I did my best to help the country do well. I want you to do the same. I'm going to try to set you up for success.
It's almost as if their ego isn't the number one priority of their life.
Which I'm happy about. Again, I don't want to talk about the exception. So I got to observe all of that stuff firsthand. I saw my outgoing commander have a deeply ingrained desire to ensure the success of his following commander. Do everything within his power to make sure that they were inheriting a unit that was operating well organized, that everything was planned for the ceremony, and that everything was planned for things to go smoothly following the ceremony. He was conscious of the things that had happened a year ago that maybe were problematic for him, and he took steps to plan out a training plan, to set up the organization of the wing so that everything would go smoother for them than it did for him. I love this value, this way of behaving. He saw his outgoing Colonel George Buck Jr. saw his outgoing as an opportunity to set his successor up to be successful and not have any of the problems that he did when he got there, and did everything within his power to make sure that happened.
Including getting Ben Rich, the most overzealous exec that he could find in all of the Air Force, to sit in that chair and make sure it all went smoothly.
That he just got lucky for.
Oh, wow. Was that like, wait a minute. Were you just like flashing a tiny bit of ego on the podcast? This is unprecedented.
So yeah. Okay, well, you know this. How do wing commanders and stateside bases get their execs?
They interview for them.
They interview for them. They put out, they advertise for it, they review your records, and then they interview and bring you in. And then the exec they get is the one that they hand selected from a pool of elite officers who are all trying to vie for the opportunity. Do you know how they got me?
Officers. The elite ass kissers is what you meant to say. No, how did they get you, Ben?
I volunteered, and it was random on the next rotation. The commander had no influence whatsoever in my rank, my point of origin, my career field, my background, my gender, my preferences, anything.
Well, yeah, he did get lucky then. Oh, he and then she got lucky.
Yeah, so here I am in this job. I didn't interview for it because those kind of processes tend to screen me out, Josh. I don't whatever it is they look for in people's records, I get screened out, so that no one ever had an opportunity to know before that I would make a great exec.
I was required to interview for the group exec one time when I was a lieutenant.
They forced you to interview?
My boss, my major, told me, you're going to interview for this because this would be an excellent opportunity for you.
Yeah, and that's the way it's looked at.
Yeah, I remember telling the 06, he's like, so, like, what kind of exec would you be? And I told him to his face, sir, I would be the best exec that you ever had, but I would hate my life and I would make sure that you knew that.
Yeah. All right, I just want to wrap this all up. I got to witness an outgoing commander doing what we hope is happening every time we transfer power in our society. Like, we concentrate power, but we want it to be governed by the rule of law, and we want it to be carried out in a way that's free of cynicism, egotism, and selfishness, so that our positive ideals are transmitted into the way that we conduct business anywhere in the world. And I got to see that firsthand, and frankly, it was inspiring and reassuring.
You just got a big old dose of like patriotic fervor right around the 4th of July and like a couple months into your deployment. So like, that's just a good re-energizer, isn't it?
Yeah. We're over here to help, and we're surrounded by allies and friends, and we're all trying to do the right thing for the right reasons. And it feels good.
Oh, Ben, you're just such a great podcast host because you just like exude this positiveness and this great energy. And so good. I actually also had a weird military deployment run-in to this past week.
Oh yeah,
which is unusual for me because I've been out of the Air Force for 10 years now, so it's unusual.
Yeah.
So this past week, we took our summer vacation. Like we took the family, and we do different things different years. This year, we just got an Airbnb up in Flagstaff, which is northern Arizona, out of the heat, and we just came up with a schedule of a bunch of completely random things to do for the 5 days that we were up there.
All right, give 3 examples to show how random it is.
Oh, 3 examples. So we did a ropes/adventure course for the kids where they put on like climbing harnesses and got up into trees, and they had like cables suspended between the trees, and they had little obstacles that they had to negotiate up in the air. That was good and bad for different reasons. We went to Lowell Observatory in Flagstaff, which their claim to fame is they are the observatory that discovered Pluto.
Okay. Those are very different things.
Yeah, we attended a scientific lecture there. We got to look through their enormous building-sized telescope that they opened up for the night, which was, okay, like my kids, like I have great kids because they just tolerated this whole thing, and they were like talking about, oh, that's kind of interesting, but it was objectively kind of boring. But when they took this telescope the size of a building, pointed it at a completely dark part of the sky, and then you look through it and you see like 1,000 stars, I thought that was really cool.
Awesome.
And then last example, make it good. We went to Bearizona, which is one of those parks where you stay in your car and you drive through different lots, and they have like wild animals that are out running around and they can interact with your car. And all right, I want to tell this story because it's so fun. Have you ever been to one of these parks? You're in your car and there are animals.
No.
Like, okay,
no,
right.
I haven't.
So there was different sections. Like this section had wolves, and like the pens are small enough that the wolves, like you can always see them wherever they are. And so it's kind of cool to get as close to these animals as you can without, like at a zoo, they're usually like way off in the distance, and maybe you get to see them or maybe you don't. There's no doubt you get to see these way up close. Multiple times we had to stop to let giant wild animals cross the street right in front of us, which was just very cool. But this route that snakes its way through all of these different areas a couple of times has these big loops that come off the side of the road. And you can see it's just like, oh, so in case the animals are way over there, you can drive on this loop and you don't violate the one-wayness of the trail. Everybody's still progressing forward, but if you want to spend more time here, you can go in the circle. And as you can imagine, there was like a line of cars as people are going through this thing and seeing the animals. And we're going through one of these, and nobody's going on the loop. I'm looking over there, and it's because obviously you can see there's no animals. There are no animals. And I'm like, let's conduct a social experiment, gang. And I turned onto this loop. My wife's like, what are you doing? This is a waste of time. There's no animals over here. I was like, aha, there are no animals over here. But let's see how many suckers we can get to follow us.
And you said this to your kids in the car?
Yes, I did. And halfway through the loop, I just stopped and like, okay, we're going to stop here. We're going to wait for like 45 seconds and pretend we're looking at something over here in the shadow. Everybody look out the side of the car. Okay, now we'll move on. And then we started driving. And Ben, I started it. Every single person behind us then did the world's worst follow the leader through this loop for no reason. And like I could see them stop for like 2 seconds in the same spot I stopped and like come to the same conclusion, like that idiot didn't see anything. He's just driving around. He totally suckered me into coming into this loop.
Oh, or they're like, what did he see? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And so we started doing this for all of the loops just because it became a game in of itself, right? And everybody always followed us.
To see how many people you could get to follow?
Yep. To see if we could start everybody going this loop for no reason. Well,
okay, that's good fun.
We got to the last...
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
No. Okay, your last loop.
Oh, yeah, we got to the last loop, which is in the bear area. And they had a bunch of brown bears just chilling out in this area. And we go on the loop where there are no bears. And there's no reason to go on this loop. And we are the only ones on this loop. But then I did all the other loops facetiously, but this one, like we got halfway around and my wife goes, no, wait, stop. And I stopped and I looked and yeah, there's 2 bears that just popped up and started coming out of the woods towards our car. And they were probably a foot or 2 from our vehicle as they're walking by. And like we have a great video of my daughter freaking out and like doing the high-pitched squealing noise that girls do when they're kind of in danger. And then another bear came from another side and ran like beside our car like they were going to fight this other bear. And they did the thing that cats do where they both got like all real big and like just kind of like stood and looked at each other.
Stood up on their hind legs.
They didn't hang up on their hind legs, but they like all their fur ruffled. And they like ran at each other and then stopped and then stared at each other for a minute and then like both turned nonchalantly and walked away. But it's like all happened within a foot of my car. I could have opened my window and pet both of them on the head. So that was...
I'm imagining that they're like bears that are like on a Bugs Bunny cartoon. You're like, all right, Bob, we put on a show for the humans in the cars. Same time tomorrow? Okay, see you then.
Yeah, all the bears know the score. They know exactly what's going on. But anyway, so those were 3 random things that we did on this trip, okay? The very last thing that we did on the day that we were driving home was there was Fort Tuthill Military History Museum was there. And we're a museum.
This really was a random trip.
It really was a random trip. But we go to this museum, and it's all volunteer only, so you have to call in advance to see if anybody's even there. And like this is an old fort that was built in like earlier than that. It was built in like the 1800s. Like the government gave land to the army, and then they gave them like 600 acres, then they leased 8,000 acres for training in northern Arizona, whatever. It's all irrelevant. But they still have the original buildings for like the company commands and everything, like set up in this big like square where the troops would actually live in tents, and those are long gone.
What was the conflict it was designed for? Was it the Mexican-American War?
No, it was just like a stand-up. It's just where the army that was stationed in Arizona would stay. It was the 158th Infantry Battalion, which was a reserve battalion. Now it's a reserve battalion, I believe. And this is just where they were headquartered. And they had, really interesting placards of like the times that they got called up and things. Like one thing that was really cool was like in the early 1900s, California was going to build a dam to like take more of the water from the Colorado than they were supposed to take, or Arizona was like, you're not supposed to be taking that much water. And so the governor activated this unit to go down to this dam construction site and not allow a single Californian to set foot on the Arizona side of the river to complete construction of the dam. And they enforced that with machine guns and military patrols.
Under his authority as a governor?
As the governor,
as his state militia?
That's right.
Wow.
There was another time. There was
I didn't know there were ever conflicts between states of that magnitude.
Arizona,
activate your state military against another state.
Yeah, have you ever heard of 2 states going to war outside of the Civil War? Like, it's crazy, right? Another time, again in the early 30s, there was an outbreak of foot and mouth disease in California, and Arizona set up a blockade on one of the crossing points from California into Arizona. And they had fire trucks like spraying fire hoses at people that were trying to cross. Like, no, you're not getting your foot and mouth disease over here. And they replaced them with machine gun pits from this infantry battalion that the government activated again.
I'm imagining the entire history of the 158th Infantry Battalion is keeping Californians out of Arizona.
Right? So great. They did play a part in World War II. They became part of a larger regiment, and most of the regiment went to Europe. But I mean, it's crazy because they spent like 3 years of World War II training, and then they actually went to the Pacific Theater, and they were there for like 3 years. But I'm talking about all of this, like they took 2 of these company command buildings, they converted them into museums, and they did everything chronologically, starting with when it was activated in like 1800 something. And they had examples of the uniforms and big detailed descriptions of like all the weapons they used. And in a lot of cases, they actually had weapons, like authentic, like old timey, like rifles and things. And it's cool to go through it chronologically as we're seeing what this unit does and what they were trained for and how their unit patch changed and blah, 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 blah. We get to the very end of the second building, and it's like the Global War on Terror. And I'm like, oh, cool. This is like they're still active. They're still participating and stuff. And Ben, they had a mannequin wearing their modern day uniform, and the combat patch that was on their shoulder had also changed. I'm like, oh, I recognize that patch. And then I looked at the placards.
This was your unit?
This is the unit that I deployed with in 2008 in Afghanistan.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And you'd failed to remember the number, but when you saw the combat patch, you made the connection.
Yes. When I saw the iconography, then I knew who they were. But like,
that's why we place so much importance on that iconography.
The Army is all about their numbers, man. Oh, we're part of the 42nd Division, the 158th Battalion, and 2nd Company. Like, dude, shut up. I don't understand what any of that means. But
I recognize that patch.
But I recognize this 6-way arrow thing that you have on your shoulder, yeah. And then there was placards like, oh, they were deployed in this province in Afghanistan. I'm like, yeah, so was I. That's the province we were in. That's the guy I worked for.
What? Were you in one of the photos they had up?
I was not in one of the photos. Oh. No, I was not. Because they were there for like 3 years or something, and I was there for 6 months. Because
but you could have just been there one of the times that they took the photos from.
It could have just been totally random. Yeah, it could have been. No, they did have a picture of, they were there to provide security for the provincial reconstruction team. And that reconstruction team was Air Force. And they did have pictures of the weekly Army versus Air Force volleyball game that they played. But I was not in any of those photos because I don't play volleyball. What was really awkward there, though, was... like the curator was he was a retired senior master sergeant, chief master sergeant from that unit, and like he's walking around and I was pointing at it and he's like, oh, do you recognize any of this stuff? As I'm pointing at something and telling my kids, oh yeah, I was there. And he's like, oh, were you deployed? I was like, and you can't get out of it, right? And I was like, right. I mean, I was actually deployed.
I was in the 158th
with these guys, and that guy, like, okay, so. This is a retired Army Chief Master Sergeant that is now curating the unit's history museum. Can you imagine the level of excitement that this man felt? Like,
oh man,
you were there with us, and like to the point where it's like, dude, calm down. Like, I hated every second I was with you. You guys are idiots. Like,
you didn't say that.
I didn't say that to him. No, of course not. Apologies to everybody in the 158th. I'm going to slander you. I feel like I made up for that, though, because I made a hefty contribution to the museum before I left. So I remember being there as the active duty guy.
You accidentally patronized it, and then once you knew what you were doing, you made a deliberate decision to patronize it.
I made a deliberate decision. Oh, here, let me give you... Because I knew in my head, Ben's like, let me give you some money because I'm going to make fun of you on my podcast tomorrow. These
all
guys,
right, Josh.
I'm not going to talk super bad about
that. That was great.
But
I did not know about that, and you caught me off guard with it. And I loved the twist ending. That was a fantastic story. 2 thumbs up. Do you have a bad at parenting segment for us today?
I mean, kind of. So yeah, let me.
I'm bad at parenting every day because I'm not there, but.
Let's do this. So bad at parenting, like we've talked before about, my son's kind of got some anxiety issues, right? And I saw a high and a low of that in between the time that we recorded the last podcast. Okay, so let's do the good first.
Take us on the parenting roller coaster, Josh.
The parenting roller coaster. So my son has anxiety issues where like he just loses control of his bodily functions, or he lets his body and his adrenaline glands take over. And we're trying to tell him, hey, you're having one of those moments where your body thinks you're in an existential crisis and you're not. You need to relax. And it's the mind over matter thing that we're trying to teach him, right?
Sure.
He's still struggling with it, but we got him a workbook and he's working through. It's helping him like identify and self-reflect. We got him it's called a breathing Buddha. It's just a little Buddha guy that lights up, and you click it and then he does a breathing exercise in time with the lights as they change color or whatever. And
they have apps that do that too.
Yeah. I mean, I think Apple Watches do the same thing. But the idea is that we're trying to like educate him on this and have him create these tools with it himself to manage it. What's funny is one of the things that he did early on was that he liked to calm down. He liked watching a lot of Bob Ross. I can't imagine anything that's more relaxing than watching Bob Ross paint happy trees.
Bob Ross used to come on when I was a kid on PBS on Saturday afternoons. Where do kids today get Bob Ross? Is it just all archived on YouTube?
I think every second of it is on YouTube. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, what's funny about this is then one of the summer activities that we had planned as a family is I bought some miniatures. We went to the game store and we bought some miniatures, and we're going to sit down. I'm going to show them. All right, this is how you file off the mold lines. This is how you prime it. And this is how we paint it. Here's some basic painting techniques. Let's have fun paint these models together. And we spent an afternoon painting models. And as we were painting, I remember I switched colors and I got some on my thumb and I pressed it and I smudged it in a spot on the model I didn't want. I was like, oh, dang, I'm going to have to go back and fix that. That's a mistake. And my son goes, there are no mistakes, only happy accidents. And in that moment, I decided to embrace this mentality. I'm like, you know what, kid? You're right. This is a happy accident. And I instead painted that spot that I smudged. I just decided to paint that the color that I smudged it with. And it turned out to be a really cool aesthetic and made the whole model better as a whole.
Wow.
So
nice.
This is a high point for my son managing his anxiety, right? Having all these tools and remembering them in the moment. Now for the low part.
And a positive externality.
And a positive externality. Yeah, here's the low part. Part of our vacation, the first day, we actually went up there on the 4th of July. And we had found there wasn't going to be a fireworks demonstration, but there was a county park that did like a live band and food trucks, and they were going to put on this enormous laser light show. And that was going to be our 4th of July fireworks. So we were going to hang out. We're going to listen to this live music, just like, lawn chairs.
I was hoping you were going to say drones. Laser lights, huh?
Laser lights. Yeah, if we find a place that does drones, we'll definitely go. But this is just lasers. We're behind the times. It's Arizona. I don't know what to tell you. So we set up we get to this place, and it was way more crowded than we thought it was going to be. I stood in line, I cannot exaggerate this, for 1 full hour to get balloon animals for my kids. And
balloon animals?
Balloon animals. The line for the lady to get balloon animals. And Ben, I was only like 10 feet from her. There was only like 15 kids in front of me.
Was it the kind where she was wearing a clown costume and she was taking requests? Is that why it was taking so long?
She was not in a clown costume, but she was taking requests. She was seated at a station with like an air pump even. And she was very good. She was very good. My son got a rattlesnake, and she took time to fill individual sections of the balloon with salt so it actually rattled when he shook it. So, I mean, she knew what she was doing. But I stood in line for a full hour. That was one of those moments where I had to conjure up my dadness and be like, all I have to do to be a good dad is stand here patiently with my daughter and just keep her entertained until it's her turn to get a giraffe.
Did they have good mobile data so you could watch TikTok while you were waiting?
No, and I didn't. This is one of those times I was not going to disengage from my phone.
All right, good for you.
I engaged with my daughter the whole time. We played a stupid patty cake game. And then the things that you do when you're standing in line with your kids.
Josh.
Shut up, Ben. Like, that's not the point of the story. Anyway, like, it's super crowded. We're set up on this. We got good spots in the shade to watch the live band, and they were playing music. But then, like, we're sitting down, we're hanging out, and it's evident that my son is having a worse and worse time as time progresses, as more people pile in, and as the music gets louder and more stuff is happening around him.
Just because of noise and crowd?
And that's the thing. Like, then it got to the point where, you can turn and look at somebody and know that something's wrong.
Does he have a specific phobia, or it's just a general fatigue-based problem?
So, I'll get there. This time we looked.
Yes, I know what you're saying. You just glance over them and you're like, uh-oh, this is not going well and it's getting worse.
Well, and here's the problem is that we looked at him and we're like, hey, come here. And he like gets down to eye level and like, what's wrong? He's like, nothing. Okay, you're lying to me. What is wrong? And apparently that second question was the catalyst that all it took to just destroy all mental barriers that he had, like holding back this tide of just...
He was holding it together till that moment.
He had a full-on anxiety attack. And like...
Your check of the barrier breached it.
Yeah. It's like, what is this crack in the dam? And you flick it and then you die in the resulting flash flood. And he wasn't able to verbalize it. He wasn't able to like coherently speak his feelings. Like that entire part of his brain was completely shut down. And it was just clear. What do you want us to do? And like, just, there was nothing for it. And so finally we just like, all right, well, we're just gonna have to go. And so we packed up and we left, long before any of the laser lights or anything. But like, it was like 2 minutes in the car, and it was night and day difference. Like you could see like all of it, just like the anxiety just left him. And so he actually told me, this was on Tuesday, and then yesterday, Saturday night, he came up and he said, I think it was the fact that I was in a place that I didn't know. I was surrounded by people that I didn't know, and it was really loud, and it was just a lot of strangers. Like, it was like, oh yeah, you just had a full-on social anxiety attack. Like that, we get it.
Is the workbook and the tools that he's been given what helped him be able to reflect on it and come to a conclusion after the fact?
I hope so. Also, we've been like, whenever he brings it up or whenever he brought it up through the week, we would encourage him to do that reflection. Be like, hey, so think about what about that situation do you think really made you feel those feelings? Because if you can identify them, that'll help you control them or avoid those circumstances in the future if that becomes the thing you need to do. And so, yeah, go ahead.
I've had anxiety problems with 2 of my children. One of them, we identified it young, probably when my daughter's about your son's age, when it really started to come to a head and manifest, and we got her some help with a psychologist, and that gave her the tools that she needed, I think, to cope with it. And since then, it's been manageable. The other, my second son, started developing issues, and it was so late of onset that we didn't have time to identify it and intervene in time. And I'm worried about him.
Yeah,
because he's already left home, and we kind of just saw how bad it could be just as he was leaving, but it didn't prevent him from leaving.
Well, that's good though. Like, I mean, he at some point, as you get older, you have to recognize it as a limitation within yourself, and then either build the coping mechanisms or I don't know what the right word is, but like you just need to have the capability to move past those limitations, or else you're going to be either struggling with them or limited by them your whole life.
Yeah.
I think when you and I were kids, it was much more toxic because our parents just would have told us to stop crying or sit there and shut up until this thing is over. And then we don't have coping mechanisms so much as I think we have scar tissue that just stops that from happening.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's a lot I can think about, and this feels like a whole episode in and of itself, dealing with mental illness and generational differences and those kinds of things. So we'll have to put that one in the queue. With that toxic masculinity thing again, like it took a lot from me not to just shake him and be like, you are 11 and you are like, I am physically present. You're fine. You're ruining,
yes.
You're embarrassing us and ruining everyone's experience. Just get over it.
Exactly. But that's not going to help him. That's going to make him feel bad for having
Good
feelings.
for you, Josh. Good for resisting your initial impulse there.
I was still super annoyed in the moment, but just crush it all down, do the parenting thing. And this is the thing. Like my whole
no one blames you for that.
Well, this was my mantra the whole trip. Is like, I'm not here for me. I'm here for logistics. Like whatever the circumstances is, my job is just to get the stuff that we need from point A to point B. So when we made the call, we just need to go. I'm like, okay, pack up. This goes in here. This goes in here. This goes in the wagon. This goes in the car. We're in the car. Okay, great. Let's go.
That sounds like a Jerry Seinfeld routine waiting to happen. Okay. What are you reading right now, Josh?
Oh, Ben, I'm still on Summer Night. I didn't get to read it all this week because I was on vacation. So it's the Dresden Files, Jim Butcher. I'm still loving it. It's great. He's just made a contract with an archfey, Mab of the Winter Court. Like this is bad. This is bad for Harry.
Well, I just finished up Bad Parts by Brandon McNulty, which I can't necessarily recommend, but now I've moved on to my next book, which is Invisible Women by Carolyn Criado Perez.
Oh, what's that going to be about?
So I want to invite you to read this one with me and our listeners, Josh. I want this to be our next book, probably not next episode, but maybe the one after. The subtitle of it is Data Bias in a World Designed for Men.
Ooh, Ben, you are putting me in a difficult situation because my wife has already queued up the book that I need to read after the book that I'm reading now. And if I go back into my house and I tell her, hey, Ben jumped you in line, I'm going to be in trouble.
How about try a different approach? How about propose this book as your next read to let her look at the content and the subject matter and see if it's approved. If we need to postpone this a few episodes, that's fine.
I'm going to do that. I'm going to tell her, hey, I saw this book and I was recommended to it and we might do it on the podcast. What do you think about us reading this at the same time together as like a couples thing? And then she's going to listen to this part of the podcast and the jig is going to be up, and I'm going to yell that again.
All right. Well, let me know if you want me to edit it out. So that's my next read, Invisible Women by Karen Criado Perez. I've read it before. I'm reading it again. I want to talk about it on the podcast, so maybe episode 104 or 105 we'll talk about it. So listeners, if you want to, link in the show notes, join in and read this book with us. For our main segment today, Josh, we need to talk about, I propose to you that we talk about whether or not you can or should know your own destiny. And what made me think about this is I watched Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse again, and my imagination started to be captured by the idea that Miles, in his conflict with the Spot, had this moment where he saw a vision of his own future, and in it he saw his own father being killed, and that became the main point of contention between him and Spider-Man 2099, Miguel O'Hara, for the whole rest of the movie. Miguel O'Hara's point was that even though you know your destiny, you can't prevent it, and I'm going to stop you from trying to change it. Now, they never deal with the fact that whether or not Miles was actually seeing the future or just some possibility. Right. But if he's, there's a difference here, and I want to kind of get into this difference as we talk about this. Like, if you see the future, then no matter what you do, what you saw is still going to happen. If you're seeing a possibility, then the question is, can or should you try to do something about it?
So a lot of this feels like it might intersect with our episode that we talked about different methods or depictions of time travel. Yes. Because this is kind of a time travel thing.
As I found myself thinking about this, I ended up going back across a lot of those movies that we talked about that. So I don't want to retread all of that. What I want to focus on is the protagonist having an opportunity to, and either choosing to or choosing not to, know their own destiny. And then when they know that, what they do with the information.
Okay, so there's different philosophical questions here. There's questions of how this could be possible. There's questions of like the mechanics of everything that's happening, like the time travel and just information moving backwards or forwards through time. But then I think what you're wanting to do is then focus on like almost the moral aspect of it. Is like ignoring all of that, just assuming that it can happen. Like we'll set up a couple of scenarios. This is what I'm imagining is going to happen, right? We'll set up, okay, let's assume A, B, and C. What is the moral implication? Okay, now let's assume A, B, and D. What's the moral implication? Is that what we're planning on doing? Excellent.
Yeah, kind of like the trolley problem, but you're the one with the lever and you're the one on the tracks.
I don't like either of those scenarios. I feel like lever me and track me could get together and come up with a better solution to this whole thing.
So there's a lot of aspects of this. One I want to try to tackle right away is kind of the nature of prophecy. In some of the mechanisms of this, there's some mystical aspect to it, an oracle of sorts, someone who somehow has a knowledge of the future and will mete out some of it to you, whether in great detail or in very general form. And the level of detail they use is usually part of the mechanism here. So as I was examining this idea, it's hard not to go back to one of the classical examples of knowing your fate in literature, and that is Oedipus Rex by Sophocles, the classic Athenian tragedy.
This is the original source. This is the first version of
that way
of knowing your destiny, is the self-fulfilling prophecy. Like that's what this is.
Yes. So for whatever reason, Laius the king went to the oracle, and I don't know the origin of the oracle's powers of prophecy or whatever, but the oracle, Laius wants to know his destiny as king, and the oracle tells him that he will be killed by his own son, who will then marry his wife.
Yes.
And so, and this is notorious. So then he does, as you might think, and what has happened throughout history, historically, when this same kind of thing happens, is he's like, well, I'm a king. I have the power to prevent this fate, and I will therefore take action to prevent it from happening. So all I need to do to prevent this from happening is to kill my son.
And then the Greek gods laughed uproariously at his audacity. Like, oh, this poor mortal thinking he has any agency. Yeah.
So he delegates it to his wife and says, hey, Jocasta, kill our son, because otherwise he's going to grow up to kill me and marry you. And she's like, okay. And then he goes away and she's like, I don't want to do that. So she delegates it to a servant. This is what happens with power. You delegate things.
Yeah, you don't ever do
She
anything
delegates
yourself.
it to a servant, and the servant's like, I don't want to kill this baby. I'll just leave it here on this mountaintop and it'll die. And then he goes away.
But in classic Greek fashion, of course, babies left out in the woods don't die. They get raised to be amazing heroes.
Yes, so this baby is found by a shepherd who raised him to a man who no longer knows his royal lineage and divine heritage, and he eventually comes into conflict with his father, the king, kills him, defeats the Sphinx, earns the right to the throne, marries his own mother, and all the prophecies are fulfilled.
Yeah,
and
in a classic ironic moment, because the characters don't know
yes,
it's been fulfilled, but we, the audience, do.
Great example of irony in literature. The main idea of this story is the idea of fate, and how the oracle, whatever their powers were of prophesying the future, either set Laius on the course that led to the death that was prophesied. I don't know. That's kind of what we're getting at here.
Yeah.
Did it happen because the oracle said it, or was it going to happen and there was nothing they could do about it?
This is well trod, like fantasy, like just story fluff. Like this is just meat and potatoes for any high fantasy setting. And there's so many that have trod on these. The Wheel of Time, like just
okay. I wrote that down. I want you to spend some time talking about the Wheel of Time and how it deals with this.
So the title of the Wheel of Time, it's set in a high fantasy setting, but the idea of the Wheel of Time is that time, in a very large sense, is circular, and that it's going to repeat itself. Like the names and the places will change, but the canon events don't, and they just keep happening over and over and over again.
Right. Yes.
And they do a lot of really interesting things. Robert Jordan is fantastic. I miss the guy. But there's a few points in the story where they give glimpses of what they call the Age of Legends, like this era that happened previous to the one that they're in. And there's a lot to symbolize that it was like modern day society where everybody was provided for and there was electricity and giant flying vehicles that took people from one place to another. And so it's this interesting analog to like think about like, oh, and then they thought they found some amazing thing. It turned out to be pure evil, and then it destroyed everything everywhere for all time. And then the story just repeats itself over and over.
What's the prophetic element of that? What mechanism did Robert Jordan use for transmitting the details that could potentially hint as what would happen in the future of specific lives?
So they're constantly talking about, like, they're aware of the existence of the wheel. They talk about the wheel as a concept of this is the thing that drives time forward. This is the wheel weaves as the wheel wheels. They talk about the tapestry of time, and human lives are the threads in the pattern. Like, it's a lot of allegory, and it's shrouded in very mystical and almost religious context and verbiage. But the core idea is that they all believe that time is this big cycle. And then there's multiple story elements because it's a high fantasy. There's magic where they get prophetic visions of both the far past and the far future, which then reinforces these ideas of things that are going to come to pass or things that have come past, whatever.
Okay, but when it's too general or too far away, it's easy to just not have it be an influence in an individual character's life. Like, yes,
okay,
at some point in the far past, something happened that kind of represents what happens now, or in the future, something's going to happen. But what does that mean about my existence? It doesn't really influence an individual character's decision-making that much.
Then I will give you a specific example. Spoilers for The Wheel of Time, everybody. One of the main characters, the Aiel girl, oh God, what's her name? Avienda. Avienda sees a vision of the future. And the way that this is delivered to her is just storytelling perfection. Because she sees a series of visions, and it takes you and her, the reader and the character at the same time, discovered that these visions started in the far, far future, thousands of years in the future. And slowly the perspective of the visions work their way back through the first-person view of her descendants, until the last vision that she sees is of her children, like through the eyes of her children that she's going to have in events that are immediately following the conflict that they're experiencing at the time.
So it reaches a point where the detail and the proximity of what she's seeing is sufficient that she could potentially influence it with her actions right now.
Yes, and that becomes like this whole this idea for her character for the last half of the last book is like, is this predetermined? Is this going to happen, or do we have any agency over it? And it is tied up in one conversation that she has with another of the wise women that she knows. And then she goes, okay, so the wise woman's talking to her, and like she's freaking out. He's like, can we change this? Do we have any ability to? Should we even try? And the other person goes, so you saw your 4 children. Yes, I saw my 4 children. You heard all their names. Yes, I heard all their names. And she goes, change one. Don't tell anybody what the 4 kids' names were in your vision, and then change one of their names when they're actually born. And then if that name sticks, then you have the ability to change the future.
Okay, what happened?
Oh, nothing. The events of the books end before any of that comes to pass. Don't me.
It
was not a letdown. It's just it's.
I want to know how Jordan and Sanderson handled that.
Well, that's the idea. Is that you don't know the way that they handled
that's the question. That's the heart of what I want to get at today. If you know your own destiny, can you change it?
Well, and that's what they left open-ended, and I think that's fine for a literary standpoint, for it to be open to the interpretation of the reader.
Okay.
And those events don't matter. It was the book. It was about the conflict. Never mind. All right, we don't have to go into that.
So they didn't really grapple with it a lot in Across the Spider-Verse, but I propose that one of the main conflicts in the 3rd movie in the Spider-Verse trilogy will be them grappling with this idea of knowing your own fate, and then what can you influence it.
Well, I mean, that's the main. That's what they set up with Miguel O'Hara as the antagonist, saying this is the way things are, and you can't challenge it because there are dire consequences. The whole question is going to be, well, what happens if we do challenge it?
Right. Yes. But Miles isn't really thinking about the implications of that. He's kind of just making his decision because he doesn't want that outcome to happen, which is usually the way this is. This is usually the way that this is portrayed in fiction, that the protagonist just has this visceral reaction to the thing that they saw and they want to prevent it.
Well, this is told over and over and over again. Hero with 1,000 Faces style. This is Neo from the Matrix learning you have to make a decision.
Let's talk about that one for a minute.
Okay. Is that on your list? You wrote so many movies on this list.
That one's on my list.
It is on the list.
There are these religious zealots that are in this cult that have whatever, why am I spacing all their names? Morpheus and Trinity, and that have all these religiously hinting names that come and try to recruit Neo, who we later come to find out is actually in the Matrix, and they're trying to convince him that there's a prophecy about his destiny that has to be fulfilled, that he is prophesied to be the one. This is hinting at like lots of religious traditions that believe in the coming of a Messiah that will fulfill all of these grand things on a cosmic scale, but it's all focused and concentrated on the destiny of a single person.
But then if we take the next step in the other movies, it's shown and portrayed and explained to Neo that it's not only the human prophecy, but they got that prophecy from a machine program who is part of the larger system, that if he serves a purpose
that was their
from
mistake in the sequels, was trying to explain the mechanics of all of it.
Well, but he served. This is the idea that I want to focus at. Yes, they had this prophecy for a Messiah for the humans, but that Messiah also served a completely separate and completely objective purpose for the machines.
So it served a purpose for both.
But from different sides of it. They only saw he's going to be the one that saves us all. And the machine's he's going to be the convergence of this equation that's going to cause a reboot.
And they both needed him, and so he was the one.
But because he was supposed to make the decision for all of mankind, but he had too close ties to another character. He took this, what his responsibility was vast, and he focused it down to I don't care about my responsibilities. I care about this other person, which is kind of selfish, really.
Well, that's a great question, because I think there have been depictions of both, where somebody gets in that position that appears to be one of great destiny, and they just decide to fulfill their destiny, or they try to rebel against it with varying degrees of success.
Well, this is the same thing happened to our IRS agent friend, Will Ferrell. Harold.
Agent Smith. Oh, yes.
Harold. Yes, in Stranger Than Fiction, because he found out that, I don't want to die, but then he read that he was going to die saving a kid, and he's like, okay, well, I guess I'm okay with it.
Yeah, okay, you gloss over that real fast, but I want to take our time with it. Hang on, I'm going to go back to Neo for a sec. So,
how long did you want to talk about all these movies?
Well, I don't know how they determined that Neo was the one, but for whatever reason, they determined that Neo was the one that was going to fulfill all of these destinies, but they still didn't know what to do next. So then they went to the Oracle. The Oracle was this prophetic figure that somehow had knowledge of things. We later determined the mechanics of it, but I think in revealing the mechanics of it, they made the story more boring.
I like
but
those
when
parts.
you didn't know the mechanics of it, she was just like this nice old lady baking cookies. And she does a little thing that's a microcosm of the bigger thing that's happening, where she's like, oh, and don't worry about the vase. And he turns to see what vase she's talking about, and he knocks it off the planter. And she says, what's really going to bake your noodle later is you wondering if that would have happened if I hadn't told you about it.
Yes. Would that have happened if I hadn't said anything? Like, ooh, and it does. Because the only reason he turned to look for the vase is because she told him not to worry about the vase.
Right. Yes. That's what I'm getting at here. So in Stranger Than Fiction, Harold gets a hint that he has a destiny of an untimely demise, and he spends most of the film trying to determine the source of the knowledge and see if he could potentially change his destiny. And then when he finds out he's part of a story, and he reads the story, and then he basically decides that he accepts the fulfillment of his destiny, then he goes knowingly to his death because he's willing to fulfill his destiny.
Which I'm still on record, like, those are the wrong questions to ask. Like, this person was able to type reality into existence, and they're worried about the rest of Harold's Thursday. That's ridiculous. She needed to solve all the world's problems.
Okay, so here's another one, and I kind of enjoy how they handled it. You remember in the story arc of the original Back to the Future movie, Marty knows that just before he went back in time to 1955, Doc Brown was shot by Libyan terrorists with the Uzi. And so Marty goes back and meets Doc and encounters someone who isn't world wise of that 40 years of time or 30 years of time that had transpired, and he still has these very idealistic ideas about time travel, and he insists to Marty that he can't know his own destiny. And Marty attempts several times to tell him.
And then Doc Brown eventually does end up watching the videotape or reading his letter or one of those. Yeah, he reads the letter. He taped it all together, whatever. And then he was wearing bulletproof vest at the mall when he got shot. That's the wrong question. Here's the real question, because everybody's always like freaked out at the beginning of the movie. Why does this elderly weird scientist guy have such a kinship and a connection and a friendship with this young Marty character? Okay. And then the first time Doc, like, we saw how they met. This is why, is because Marty showed up in his life 30 years prior looking exactly the same, explained the circumstances of him being there, and that's the first time Doc met Marty. And then so when Doc saw Marty from the 1985 timeline, before Marty had known him and traveled back in the future, he goes, holy crap, that's Marty. And then that's where the relationship came from.
I'm having a logical problem here because it's a closed loop and it doesn't make sense.
How is it a closed loop? Doc knew Marty before Marty knew Doc, and Marty knew Doc before Doc knew Marty. That's all it was.
That's the loop being closed.
That's the loop being closed, yes. The first time Doc met Marty, Marty already knew Doc. And the first time Marty met Doc, Doc already knew Marty. And like, it's this enclosed circle. And that's why they have such a friendship, is because both of them knew each other the first time they met, which is, that's the crazy thing you think about.
That's a fascinating fan theory, and I love it, but it is a bit of a tangent. The part I want to focus on is that Doc was giving Marty what almost sounded like reciting some kind of philosophical textbook idea of the weight of knowing your own fate and how he didn't want to accept that responsibility. And he recited it like it was his religion. And then at the end, when Marty runs up to Doc's lifeless corpse, and then Doc sits up apparently unharmed from the attack by the terrorists, and Marty's like, but what did you, and Doc reaches into his pocket and unfolds the letter that Marty had written that Doc insisted he wasn't going to read. And he's like, I was just like, what the hell? And that was it. That was how he dismissed departing from his principle about the sanctity of knowing your own fate.
Never mind that all of these movies hinge on the fact that altering the past can create these alternate skewed timelines, but we don't care about that, because what they just did was create a skewed timeline where Doc Brown didn't die by Libyan terrorists in 1985, but they don't care about that because they hadn't experienced the events after that yet. Who's like, in a world where time travel exists, like, is there any concept of now? Like, it all becomes just destinations. All that stuff already exists. You just haven't experienced it yet.
Okay, so I want to focus on one the Terminator series. So one of James Cameron's first movies was Terminator 1, and it kind of began with this conceit that there was this present day person, and then out of nowhere shows up this future person telling them that they're in danger. Sarah Connors is in danger because someday her son is going to be born and stop the robot rebellion, and they're sending back someone to kill him. Then Arnold Schwarzenegger turns up. He's the T-800 that's there to terminate Sarah Connors so she'll never give birth to John Connors and stop the robot rebellion in the future.
Come with me if you want to live.
Yes. Then in the second one, you kind of have a regurgitation of it, but now there's these weird loops that start to arise because of like what you do now will have an impact on the future, and does knowing about it influence your actions. And there's one character I want to talk about. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I was just going to point out that they did a great job with Terminator 2. This is one of the few times the sequel was better than the original, because they talk about the company that made the AI that started the whole robot revolution anyway got their start when they found the remnants of the microprocessor of the T-800 in their factory from the first movie.
Right. That's what I wanted to focus on. So one of the characters that just shows up briefly is the scientist that found the parts from the robot from the first one, and he has no idea of the train wreck that's about him. He's just a curious scientist that found some advanced technology, and he's reverse engineering it and using it to come up with new technologies that didn't exist before.
It took us in directions we never even imagined, like was one of the lines that he said.
Yes. So he's just this curious scientist with no understanding of the implications of his actions. It's kind of foreboding that he's just trying to do something new that will empower us to use machines in ways that we never have before. And then Sarah Connors blows in with the Terminator in tow, and they basically reveal to him that his actions will lead to the untimely chain of events that leads to Judgment Day, which is the machines taking control of all the nuclear weapons in the world and destroying humanity.
The T-800 was laying it out while Sarah Connor was doing a voiceover. And like at the end of the voiceover was like, I think he handled it pretty well. And they show the side, he's like, I think I'm going to throw up.
Yeah, well, during that sequence is when he uses a knife and strips all of the flesh off of his arm and reveals his mechanical under...
Which is great visually, but did he have to do the whole arm? I feel like he could have got away with just his hand.
Anyway, again, there's this Oedipus Rex style question of, did all of this happen because they knew about it and fulfilled the prophecy, or was it fate?
And Terminator series is where it's a great juxtaposition where we have Back to the Future talking about multiple timelines that are divergent and changing constantly, like just with the quantum winds. And then Terminator timeline where everything that's going to happen is going to happen and there is no stopping it. And they just don't realize it. They try so desperately to change these circumstances in the future, and it just doesn't.
All right. Well, I want to examine an example that's not based around time travel.
Oh.
Spoilers for Star Wars.
Yes.
What was the source of the conflict in the first Star Wars?
The first Star Wars? Are they talking about Star Wars episodes 1, 2, and 3, or episodes 4, 5, and 6?
The first 6.
The first... You can't use words like first when we're talking about Star Wars, and you know better than that. Like, I need you to tell me an episode number.
Okay, so they don't ever really get at the heart of it, but underpinning all of the story of Anakin Skywalker is this Jedi prophecy of one that will come and return balance to the Force.
They explore that in detail in the Clone Wars cartoons that you refuse to watch.
Take a moment and explain it.
So, no. I'm going to go with no. But the idea of the prophecy is like they just have this vague prophecy like, oh, he's going to return balance to the Force. And like Jedi being the idiots that they are, they assume balance means good. Even though like every person watching the movie, somebody that's never seen Star Wars before is like, why is there like 700 Jedi and one bad guy?
Right. Yes, this is a common aspect of prophecy. It kind of is the same in Oedipus Rex, where like you assume you know what the fulfillment of the prophecy will be, and you make your decisions on how to react to it based on that assumption that isn't necessarily true.
In the Old Republic MMORPG game, they actually have Sith, like a whole Sith civilization. They have a homeworld and everything, and they became obviously a Sith empire. Because just like the Jedi religion is built on, aloofness and no connection to the material, the physical, just pureness of purpose, I guess, is what Jedi are supposed to do. Even though they turned into weird UN-style peacekeepers We're not going to go into that. The Sith religion was built on emotion, passion, and the accumulation of power. The way that a Sith apprentice becomes a Sith master is by killing their current master. Like, that's just how it works canonically. That's why they always talk about, oh, there's always two. There's always a master and an apprentice, until the apprentice wipes out the master and then gets his own apprentice. That's how it works.
But it seems really egotistical that the Jedi assumed that the fulfillment of a prophecy of restoring balance meant that they would have more power.
I think that they were,
rather than less.
If we're conjecturing about the motivations of the Jedi, I think that they were too far removed from the oppression of the Sith Empire and from the even tide of, like, there's this many Jedi and just as many Sith all kind of battling for the soul of the universe, or whatever the crap their conflict actually was. They were just so used to them being only Jedi, and like, oh, all we know is Sith are bad, so we hunt them down whenever we find them. Like, they just completely forgot the whole concept of the Force has a whole other side that you people ignore.
So bear with me for a second while I try to lay out a Punnett square. A Punnett square is just where you have intersection of two ideas, and it makes up 2 by 2. So
it's a square.
On one axis we have the specificity of a prophecy, and on the other axis we have the population of the prophecy. So if you
how many people it affects,
right? So if you have a prophecy that affects all of humanity and it's very general, it's just something like Armageddon, the end of the world, the restore balance to the Force.
Revelations, and the 4 horsemen came, and there was strife and suffering.
Okay, well, the 4 horsemen gets into another aspect of this, and that's that it's more specific. Then it includes descriptions of particular events and places and maybe even dates or specific individuals, like Miles seeing his father die.
Okay.
And then the population is it for a great number of people or just a single individual? Like, if you have general and individual, it's you're gonna die. If you have general and humanity, it's Armageddon. If you have specific and humanity, it's like something's gonna happen at this time and place.
You ever see the movie Numbers?
No, what's that?
Oh, it's this weird movie where they opened a time capsule at the kids' school, and one of the things in the time capsule was like pages and pages of this notebook that was just numbers over and over and over again. And then for some reason, this astronomer becomes obsessed with these numbers and is trying to figure out what they mean. And spoilers for Numbers, everybody. By the end, he figures out that all of the numbers in sequence are latitude and longitude positions, times and dates, and the number of people that died at that location at that time. And he's tracking it backwards, and he found it was perfectly accurate for every one of the numbers that was written on these sheets. And what freaked him out was the last 2 digits of the entire thing was EE. And he finally tracked down the childhood home of the kid that wrote these numbers on this piece of paper. And in true horror story fashion, when he turned on the lights in this abandoned house, scrolled over every surface in this room was everyone everywhere. And it was just this prediction of the ultimate doomsday.
EE.
Yes.
Okay, and then the movie just ends with that?
No, and then he goes back to his observatory, finds out there's going to be this mega ultra solar flare that is going to wipe out the entire planet in a day or two. And then some weird stuff happens with aliens that we don't have to talk about. Let's just get away from pop culture entirely, and let's focus on the moralistic question that we said we were going to talk about at the beginning.
Good.
So
that's what I
Ben,
want to talk about.
Let's set up the scenario, okay? Let's assume that the time is ever changing the way that it is in Back to the Future. And so you have agency, and that agency will have an impact. You can change the future if you know certain events are going to happen, a la Biff with the sports almanac, okay?
Okay. So knowing something about the future just presents an opportunity to change the flow.
Yes. All right. I'm gonna expose probably a very crazy part of my brain. But sometimes, not very often, but sometimes late at night, I'll be going to the bathroom and I'll think to myself in my sleepy haze, if time travel is real and I'm able to communicate information back to me in a secret way that would enrich myself and my life, I would hide it right here. And then I'll push on one of the floor tiles to see if it pops open as a secret chamber or something. Do you ever do that?
Not in the floor tiles while I'm peeing, but the form of what you just said, like if I was trying to communicate with myself from the past and I hid something, it would be right here and then check.
Yeah.
No.
I said I was going to expose a little bit of my crazy. I've done that once or twice.
But I think that just shows the consistency of our utilitarianism versus deontological philosophical underpinnings. Like I don't believe in this.
Because you wouldn't send yourself a sports almanac, and I 100% would.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
I gotcha. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So that's the question at mind is, you can change the future. Do you? And I guess you just answered it. The answer is no.
Christians have wrestled with this from a Christian philosophy point of view for a long, long time, because the Bible's filled with prophecies of the future. And then there's lots of specific prophecies about God foreordaining you to do something, and there's arguments over whether foreordination constitutes a lack of agency.
It does. 100%.
If God says that you're going to do something, does that mean you have no choice?
Yes, even if it be like you have the illusion that it's your own decision. God is in control. As an omnipotent being, the assumption is he controls all of the switches and variables to you making that decision. So even if you feel like you have agency, you don't.
Yes. So that's part of or is it still agency, but we're just using the terminology wrong because he knows what the outcome's going to be? It's not, yeah.
If God had any influence on your actions, then you don't have agency. That's how that works.
Yeah, I have a philosophy about this. I don't want to go all the way down that hole, but I do want to give a fan theory about Star Wars. I think it's a secret Christian allegory in that one of the main conflicts between Christianity and Judaism, while they both share a common book of scripture in the Old Testament, the Jews are waiting for the arrival of the Messiah, and they believe it hasn't happened yet, and the Christians believe that all of those prophecies have been fulfilled.
I'm sitting here with this look on my face because Ben, I don't know if you're aware of this, but everything, it can be a Christian allegory. Like, it's the hero with 1,000 faces. It's the same story beats. Like, we love telling ourselves the same stories over and over, and it all fits together if you want it to.
No, I'm agreeing with you that they are common, but it's because we all share a common origin. And I'm just saying that it isn't general and non-specific. I'm saying it's specific.
Well, in contrast, in corollary, then I propose that the Bible took all of its story beats from Star Wars. I think somebody wrote the Bible after they watched all the Star Wars movies and then time traveled that sucker back to the whatever tabernacle the Bible was found in.
Your fan theory was way more entertaining than mine. So if I handed you a box and said, in here is a, we'll see, M.2, something that you could read.
Some form of technology that doesn't go out of style.
Right.
It's like, oh man, it's a VHS. Crap, I missed the time I can actually read this.
In here is a little box that will project a hologram that will tell you your destiny. Do you open it? And if so, how fast?
Well, that's very general information. Like, this is going to tell you about my personal future. Is that what the box is?
Don't nitpick the premise. Just go for it.
But I have to, because, like, who's giving this box to me? If this is just some anonymous package, then I'm going to throw it in the trash.
So you're saying the way you make the decision will be dependent upon the circumstances of how you received it.
Yes. If I know it is a package if it's a package from me, if I know that this was a future version of me sending it to myself, I absolutely watch it by myself with bated breath and take ample notes of everything that is said, because I trust myself to make good decisions in the future. If this is some random thing from some random person about my future, I'm going to look at it and say, this is some astrology nonsense, and I'm going to throw it in the trash.
Okay. I see why you were arguing with the premise, but whatever it was would kind of would have some element of self-substantiation, some technology that hasn't been invented yet or something like that would help you suspend a bit of your disbelief.
So that's built into the assumptions that the source is unquestionable. You know that everything that is contained in this packet of information is factual from whatever. It doesn't matter what the source is. And
yeah, I don't know. There's a risk. Like in Total Recall, there was that problem where he got a video of future him telling him something, and it turned out to be unreliable information.
Well, and that's because they wiped his mind and like, go to get your ass to Mars. Yeah, that whole question of reality thing. But then at the same time, like, what's the opportunity cost of not knowing? I think that's the next question. Okay, I have this thing from an unknown source, but I don't question its authenticity. It is authentic. It contains unknown information before looking at it. So it's Schrodinger's packet of future information. And like, because there's always the risk that you turn it on, it's like, oh, the entire world's going to hit by a meteor in 4 days and nothing matters. So go nuts. Versus like just such generic information like, this country is going to invade this country on whatever day. And like, here's some ways that you might be able to influence. Like at what kind of information matters to you? Like on what scale? Like, this is exactly what's going to happen to you in the next 3 days. Oh, whoop-de-doo. This is what's going to happen to the world in general over the next 80 years. This whoop-de-doo.
Okay, so let's say this is how you're going to die. Then what? Do you try to stop it? Do you just like pace yourself?
Now, new premise. You get a packet from the future. It's unquestionably authentic, and it contains detailed information about your own death. Oh, Ben, man. Ooh. Like, again, do you want to know? Because that will fundamentally alter the way that you live your life between now and then, right?
Right.
After going through the 5 stages.
If you accept it as authentic, you aren't going to try to stop it. It'll just kind of change your pacing of the way you're living.
No, we didn't say that. Like, if you accept that, like, this is authentic, then there's still the question of what is my agency in this? Because I could look at that and say, like, oh, well, you die on a vacation to Italy. Like, okay, well, I vow never to go to Italy for any reason, regardless of the circumstances.
Right.
And then a new packet immediately appears next to it. You open, it's like, you're going to die in a ski trip to Colorado, because like that's how that would go.
Right, but that we coped with this back in the time of Athenian tragedies. You know, that was Laius' first reaction to finding out how he would die. All right, well, I'll just stop that from happening.
So this has to be another assumption that we build into it. Like, do we have agency or don't we?
There was this fantastic TikTok that was doing the rounds on the internet about 2 months ago. Did you see it? So there's this trend of those videos where people are dancing and like a still frame of only a portion of it would come into the frame. So like they dance and they put their hands up, and then 3 seconds before they put their hands up, the hands would come onto the screen, and right at that instant, their hands would meet up with the moving hands.
Yes, I know the video you're talking about. I know what I'm talking about.
This kid's dancing in his living room, and the body parts are coming. He's doing all the dances, and then he sees one that's his face, and it looks like it's on fire.
And it's in excruciating pain. He's trying to avoid it. Yeah,
he's trying to avoid it, and then it happens.
Yeah, and it was funny because you look out his window and a plane crashed like right.
Link in the show notes.
That was a good TikTok, and it's talking about exactly what we have.
Yes. I don't know, Jeff.
This is boiling down. This is the question, Ben. What this question is boiling down to it is basically, do each of us individually believe that we have agency over our own future?
It is.
Because like if you know what's
going, as old as time.
Like, I know this is authentic, and this is a human thing. Even if I know it is told to me from the same authentic source that this is how you will die and you cannot change it, I'm going to do everything in my power to change it.
But, okay, yeah, and then what's the mechanism by which it was known? Like, was it known that you were going to know and you were still going to try to stop it, and you'll lead to it anyway? Like the guy trying to avoid the flaming face on the dance video?
Patrick Rothfuss explored this concept in his Name of the Wind trilogy. There was this, again, high fantasy. So there is this character that exists in the Fae world, some fairy thing, that knows the future perfectly. Not just the future, but all futures. He knows everything that could ever happen ever, regardless of the variables, and in perfect clarity, okay? And so the rest of the fairy world, like, quarantined this immobile being, and they wouldn't let anyone within hundreds of miles of the thing, because not only did it know the future perfectly, but it was malicious, and it would do everything in its power to make all of the worst outcomes come true for everyone that was associated with it, okay? And so the character that is explaining this to the protagonist is like, the protagonist goes, oh, so it's like, what, an arrow shot through time? And he goes, no, it's a plague ship shot through time that's going to infect and spread and destroy everything in its path.
Yeah. That makes me think of so many other examples where we've explored that story, where ultimately all of these things lead to some kind of unfavorable outcome that we're going to try to avoid, but we won't be able to.
This is resolved in air quotes, when like this person is completely despondent because they interacted with the thing. It's like, now I have to question everything that I'm ever decided to do and everything that I'm going to decide to do. And then another character walks up to him and slaps him across the face. And the guy stands up to punch him. And he goes, you can't punch me because that's what that thing wanted you to do. And he stops like, oh, no. And then he slaps him again. And he's like, well, you need to punch me now because just sitting there doing nothing is exactly what the thing wanted you to do. And he's just explaining to him, you can't question every decision that you're going to make from here on forward. You just can't. You'll go crazy.
Yeah. So this ultimately gets down to something fundamental for me, and that is my belief in an all-powerful being that has knowledge of future events and is choosing what parts of that to let us know, and has reasons for doing so.
Why does our podcast so often devolve into you believe in God and I don't? Like, we started this with such a lighthearted premise, and it gets so heavy.
Because you just said that if you could know your own fate, the way that your own death occurred, you would do everything in your power to end it. And I immediately thought I would do something completely to prevent it. I immediately thought something completely different. And then I asked myself, why is your answer to that question so different than mine? And this is the reason.
Oh, so you would, if you got the box then with the information, you would go through the 5 stages of grief and then just try to, maximize your utility between now and the time that you're foretold to die?
Yes. Because I believe in an afterlife.
Okay. I believe that I could do both. That I could maximize my utility and avoid the death, hopefully. But... yeah, but the kind of utility I'd be maximizing is different because I also believe in a judgment of that supreme being. You need to watch The Good Place then, because the premise of The Good Place is there's no way to get to The Good Place. Spoilers for The Good Place. We are spoiling all kinds of intellectual property today.
All right, I think we arrived at a good place with that one, Josh. Next time, I want to do something that's been a long time coming.
Oh dear.
On episode 9 of the Bad at Magic podcast, when we found our voice, if you've gone back and listened to it recently, there's something we did in there that I'd forgotten we'd done. We rated every Star Wars movie.
That was episode 9?
Yeah, can you believe it?
I thought episode 9 was the Italian job.
Yeah, it's both.
Oh, we did both of those? Man, we did not have a set format back then.
I know. So next time I want to do that with Spider-Man. So you and
We're talking every iteration of the Spider-Mans? The Tobey Maguire, the Andrew Garfields?
Yes. All the major cinematic releases. I don't want to get into like 70s cartoons and comic books and stuff like that, but just, Saturday afternoon cartoons. Just the major Hollywood movie releases of Spider-Man movies. There's like 11 of them or whatever, and we'll just rate them all 1 to end, talk about the magic systems, and have a blowout on Spider-Man next time in episode 103.
I feel like the Tom Holland movies that are in the MCU, like the Infinity War, Civil War, Endgame, like I think we need to weigh those down a bit because they're going to float way past all the other ones. It's like, well, obviously Infinity War is the best Spider-Man movie because it's the best movie.
Get ready for a few dark horses and some differences in opinion, as you've come to expect here on the Bad at Magic podcast. And if you had some ideas about what you would do if you could know your own destiny or fate, what you would do, what choices you would make, and what your basis for making those were, join in the discussion. Go on our Facebook page or go on our subreddit and let us know what you think. We always love to hear your comments.
If you like what we do, consider sharing us with a friend. If you like us, maybe your friends will like us too. If you really want to show us some love, consider giving us a good rating on the podcast player of your choice. Share us too. That's fine. Do either of those things. And if you want Ben to be just the wholesome, uplifting guy that he is, and you want me to continue to drag him back down to the earth that the rest of us live on, consider becoming a patron on our Patreon page.
And until next time, try to be a little less bad at magic.